so much. I love you so much. I love you so much. I love you so much.
All right, all you positive heads, welcome back to another episode. So happy to be here with you all on video as well this time. Have my good friend Chris Jackson back with me on the show. For those of you who have not caught Chris's previous visit to Positive Head Studios, Chris, well, why don't you take a minute and tell a little bit who you are, catch those up who maybe didn't catch our recording before.
Sure. Yeah, so let's see. I do a lot of work in transformational experiences for people, and with a background in subconscious behaviorism, to throw a lot of events, really toward bringing people together.
Wonderful events.
Thanks. And yeah, really with the intention of bringing people together and creating a world that works for everyone, where everybody wins.
That's a good aim, and you're definitely achieving that aim. And yeah, so I had such a good time, Chris being a friend of mine, we had such a good time last visit that we've decided to have Chris on to do some co-host episodes, and a little shorter than the last one, went pretty long, if I recall. Yeah. And so we're going to break them up into a little more bite-sized bits here. Chris is going to drop some wisdom on everybody. And before we jump into some of the topics that we're going to talk about, what I would like to do is tell everyone a little bit about speaking of events that you throw. Pretty exciting you have coming up here in a couple months, One Love. Yeah. So you maybe take a moment and explain a little bit about the history of One Love and what exactly people can expect from this upcoming event.
Well, One Love is it has been an existing festival. It's been around for a few years, which was kind of like prior to us coming on, was more of like a smaller, intimate, live music, yoga festival, and some workshops and things of that nature. And, basically we're scaling it up, and we've added, a lot more in the electronic side. And we have a lot of different collectives now that are coming together to really create the whole One Love experience as a collaboration of community. And yeah, it's awesome. We have multiple stages this time. An insane venue. I mean, one of the most amazing venues I think I've ever seen in California.
It's on a lake, right?
Festival. Yeah. Yeah, it's on a lake. You can go in the water. We're going to have stages, like this super beautiful beach, at the portion of the lake that we're using with, where we'll have stages right there on the beach where you can be dancing,
swimming
and
listening to music.
Yeah, and jet ski, like water sports.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty awesome. So really looking forward to that. It's October 20th to the 22nd, or for early entry, people will start on the 19th.
Gotcha. And it's Lake Paris?
Lake Paris, yeah.
And that's how far outside of Los Angeles?
It's about an hour, just about an hour between LA and San Diego from either side.
Cool. Well, so for all you positive heads that are anywhere near Los Angeles, you have no excuse to not come out. I will definitely be there, and would love to see you guys and to mix it up at a festival. As the listeners know, I go to as many of these things as I can, and the fact that this one involves is sort of your baby makes it extra special. So you have and also guys, we have a little discount code that Chris has been gracious enough to offer for you guys. If you use the coupon code POSITIVEHEAD, all one word, when you go to buy One Love ticket, you get a discount. So yeah, that's really, really cool of you guys. So just remember that. Same code we've ever used for anything. And October 20th through 22nd, would love to get to meet some of you guys. I mean, we have such a great community, little Facebook group that continues to grow. Yeah. And it's such like taking on a life of its own. So one of the things that people have been asking for is for us to put together an event. And it's just, I have so much going on. The bandwidth to do it, as you know better than anyone, it takes a lot to produce events. So I love the fact that you're throwing an event. I'm going to be able to come and maybe even participate in a panel or something like that. And
we'll definitely have speakers there. It's going to be an amazing party. Like super fun and amazing workshops and panels and great place to learn. I mean, you had asked about what the intention was behind it, and it's really for us all to come into a working understanding of what it means to be one with everyone and everything, and to experience love and connection wherever we go. So
I love that. I always challenge the listeners, as I challenge myself, and it's funny enough, because one of the talks that I gave actually at Lucidity Festival a couple years ago, that was how I left it off. I was like, so my challenge to all of you today that are here is to go out, and everyone that you interact with the rest of this festival, the rest of this event, act as if, play the game is everywhere you go, you're there waiting for yourself. And it's literally an extension of self, a reflection of self, and play with that idea. And it's such a beautiful thing. And you've now made a festival with that as the heart of it. So it makes a whole lot of sense that you're sitting here right now. And so you guys definitely be sure to come out if you can. You've got a couple months notice, so you have no good excuse not to attend. And let's dive into some Chris Jackson wisdom. I love having people on the show. It gives me a chance to learn from others and to kind of pick your brain and pick my guest brain. And so one of the things that you and I have talked a little bit about just in general since we've been friends is relationships and that sort of thing. And you've had some really good insight. You made me laugh saying how to turn relationships into relationships. So let's talk a little relationships. Sorry, I screwed it up.
No, you got it.
So what is your whole take on how someone can experience deeper connection, empowerment, joy when with others and in relationships?
I mean, the first thing that I think I like to get into, like in creating this experience for ourselves where we have deeper connection and joy and empowerment, for ourselves and others, is really creating a more empowering context around even the word communication. Like I like to break it down and say, what I realized some time ago is that I discovered that I really had never been communicating with people, and that most of us don't ever really even understand what the word communication means. And if you break it apart, it's co, which means with, munion is oneness, and then ation is the action of. So it's the action of being one with another person.
Interesting.
And most of us don't even know how to do that.
Right.
In fact, what we do, I think we're more primed for what I call projection and deflection.
Thinking about how we're going to reply more than even listening to what someone's saying.
Well, that for sure, and also just that, the whole context of of our relationships, as I have that most of them are before we really discover how to be communication, because it really comes down to a way of being. I think, it's not just an action or something that we do. It's how do I be communication, be a space of oneness with others, and create that experience for others as well.
Right.
And so much of just the way that we perceive ourselves and others to begin with, and the whole kind of context that we have around relationship is one typically of wanting to be in control, wanting to have connection, and manipulating others' perception of us,
right?
So that we don't look wrong or bad, and we increase, our desirability for connection,
right?
And what ultimately ends up happening is we never really have a deep level of connection with those people, and all of the things that we think are powerful are actually the things that keep us weak and disconnected. So to start, I'd say that there's a big part of how we communicate, and use language, being impeccable with our word, which is a great phrase that I love from Don Miguel Ruiz. He talks about being impeccable with our word, that our word is really like magic in a way, right? And the Toltecs would say that, when you use your word in a way that's harmful or creates that experience or possible experience for others, that you're doing black magic. right? And so impeccability means without stain, right, or something of that similar to that. And so, when I think about that, there's a couple of things. One I'll touch upon in terms of how we relate things like feelings versus thoughts versus interpretations and facts, right? So very often in relationships we'll speak of things like I feel disrespected as an example, right? And then that doesn't really connect with people, right? Because where do you feel disrespected?
Right.
How does that show up in your body as a feeling? It doesn't really, right?
Right.
In fact, you can't really feel disrespected. You have whatever feeling you're having in your body, and then you have a thought that you're being disrespected. Right. It's an interpretation of how someone is communicating to you. So that's the first step. Like actually becoming more meticulous in how we express ourselves actually creates a greater capacity for people to experience empathy with us. So one of the first things, especially when we're talking about when we're dealing with confronting any challenge that we have with another individual, or just in sharing what we're experiencing, is to speak impeccably about those things. So rather than talking about feelings, or using interpretations as feelings and vice versa, where, if I say you disrespected me or I feel disrespected, you can't really relate to that, right? You have it as a concept, yes, but it doesn't create oneness.
Right.
You can immediately speak and create that oneness by, saying like, gosh, I'm feeling this tightness in my chest right now, or I'm feeling like a twisted sensation in my stomach, or pressure in my head, right? If I say any of those things, you're right there with me, right? And you get it. And it immediately creates capacity for compassion as well, right? Then I can go into, I'm having this twisted sensation in my stomach, when you didn't call me back yesterday like you said you were going to, I had thoughts that I wasn't important to you, or something like that, or that, I wasn't valued. Right. And in expressing in that way, like I'm not projecting it at you, I'm not making you responsible for my interpretations also, which is another thing. Like if I were to say you disrespected me, right. You're like, what? Right. Immediately you get defensive. That doesn't create oneness. Right. Totally. So there's also there's a great thing that was shared with me years ago where a friend talked about this exercise that you do. I may have even talked about this on the last show that we were on, where you take like wadded up tissues, right? And they were really illustrating the difference between sharing, which is by definition communication, versus projecting and deflecting, right? And so they'd say, like, take this communication that you really want to have with somebody and wad it up into this ball or tissue and throw it at the other person's head, right? And you do like 3 of them, and you throw the first one, and it hits and bounces off. You throw the next one and it misses and goes over. You throw the other one and it hits in a completely different area than I wanted it to. And then it's like, okay, so then assess like what just happened. Was your communication received? No. Well, how did it feel? Well, maybe it felt good that I got my aggression out or whatever in one context. But how did it feel on your end? Well, I was scared. I didn't want to get hit, and so did you really receive the communication? Right. Did the communication happen actually? Right. The action of being one with another person. And no, it didn't, right? I was projecting it at you and it either deflected or it missed completely or hit a different area. So it's like, even though it may have felt powerful to me, it's more, there's a distinction there between force and power, right? Right. That real power happens in communication. Right. That power is not force. Right. Right. But that's force is this thing that kind of charges up our endorphins. It feels good, but often ends up having devastating results in terms of it not being anything like what we wanted it to be. Right. So get kind of reeling all of that back in. It's this notion that, sharing is not making others responsible for our interpretations. It's owning our own interpretations, recognizing that the actual phenomenon or experience that was had by, let's say, as an example, you not calling me when you said you would, that's what happened. But that it doesn't inherently mean anything.
Right.
Even if you intended it to mean something,
right.
Inherently it doesn't mean anything.
Right.
And so how can we create, here's the thing, is that we have a choice, actually, how we choose to interpret something. Right. And then that impacts how we experience it. And then it also impacts the power that we create around the context for the future.
Right.
Of how the outcome is going to come from that, right? Like if I come at you aggressively, am I going to get the outcome that I want?
Not
am I going to get connection? Most likely not, Or in some cases we create fear and then we get somebody to succumb, but that's also not really getting what we want because it's not really connection from a place of love and affinity. It's, from a place of fear and self-preservation. So bringing that again back to practical use of this stuff, sharing, one is being really precise in how we express, the feelings that we're having. And that immediate, as a intro to creating, that actually creates communication because it inspires empathy.
Pulls people in instead of pushes them away.
Right. It inspires empathy. They get to experience with you. We have these things called mirror neurons. So when someone is experiencing something, we experience the same thing. Right. And when we share it in a way that's non-threatening, it gives that person access. And some people would say it's vulnerable or vulnerability, right? You're just sharing what you're feeling, or I'm feeling emotional. I'm feeling sad. All of that stuff is good. It gives you entree to where I'm at. And then sharing the thoughts that I'm having also, which many people think, they don't want to do and think that if I were to share with you that I'm feeling weak or
right. I'm
scared,
vulnerable and
then I'm making myself weak. In fact, the impact of it on the opposite side is how do you perceive me when I'm sharing that way? As weak?
No, as it takes down all the walls instantly, right?
Right, and it often ends up having the opposite effect. Like it gets perceived as strength. Right. Like if you'll actually share, whatever thoughts you're having, like, God, I was having a thought of wanting to punch you in the face yesterday, right? Yeah. You're like, wow, okay, but I'm not doing it, right? And we're able to talk about it from sharing, that experience that I had, right? So we can both examine it together, right? And then what often happens is, what do you want typically out of these communications? What's the end result? Most of us, don't think about that or how we're going to get it. Right. We're constantly reacting from a subconscious place, of self-preservation and defense, which also just keeps creating a disempowering context for everything. Right. So rather than me acting like somebody who feels worthless, and feels threatened, by you exposing that worthlessness and not calling me back, instead, if I just share that I'm thinking that and the feelings that I'm having, it actually comes across as much more powerful. And I'm not left with the impact of experiencing it the same way. Right. Because I'm now, rather than saying, I'm disrespected or you disrespected me, which kind of collapses my interpretation of the phenomenon, into what I'm calling reality, when in fact it's not, right? Right. We can actually pull apart reality into the various components of my interpretation, the feelings that I'm having, and what actually physically happened.
Right. And usually what was intended was way different than what was interpreted because that person is receiving it through their filter. And
then that part also can become irrelevant. That's the other thing is people are like, well, I want to know what that person's intention was. If they intended to disrespect me, then I want to feel disrespected. Right. I'm like, well, how does that serve you? Right. Does it serve you to feel disrespected? Right. Does that feel empowering to you? Right. No. So you can choose. And then it doesn't matter what their intention is. And in fact, you will be much more empowered in creating favorable outcomes toward what you want when you don't concern yourself with what the other person's intention was. Right. Because that's a way where you're kind of, there's this other thing in a lot of transformational circles or
Don Miguel Ruiz is, it's take nothing personally. Right.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and that's a
It's
great
never
process. You know, I like to actually unfold that a little more into
Or it's
like
never
explaining
personal.
what the impact is of taking it personally.
Right.
You know, so if I choose to take it personally and choose an interpretation that's the worst possible scenario, that you were intending to disrespect me,
Mm-hmm.
then I feel shitty.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in a low frame of mind. Usually the actions that I'm going to choose from that low frame of mind are going to be actions that get me lesser outcomes than if I'm, you know, thinking the best, or in this case, not attaching myself to anything,
Right.
but instead just sharing. You know, and then what it tends to do is also, again, inspire empathy. And then where you may have been defensive before, if I was like, hey, you know, you were disrespectful by not calling me back yesterday, you know, you may say sorry, but you kind of like, the response viscerally tends to be to withdraw or feel defensive, right?
Right.
You feel attacked. It feels like adversarial conversation. I hear there's a book that many people say is a great book called Nonviolent Communication, and that some of this, what I'm talking about, kind of is very similar to that.
Yeah.
You know, the distinction of understanding those things, you're going to get much more favorable outcomes, and you create an empowered context for both parties.
Right.
Even if that other party's intentions were negative,
Mm-hmm.
you know, oftentimes those negative intentions are not even conscious. A
Right.
lot of times, you know,
Right.
they're subconscious, like they're acting from, you know, that place.
Right.
And by sharing in this way, what we get to do is we invite people's conscious minds in.
Mm-hmm.
Our conscious selves tend to be our greatest selves.
Instead of the reactive ego.
Right. Well,
know,
and our subconscious
posturing.
selves often tend to be invisible to us,
Mhm.
and often our our lesser selves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, very often it's stuff that we're not even aware of. You know, so when you share with me what you're feeling and what, you know, happened and what your interpretations were, or your, you know, thoughts you were having, it gives me the opportunity of looking at the impact of my actions on you,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm able to learn from it,
Mm-hmm.
and then it makes it very easy for me. It creates an empowering space for me to take responsibility
Right.
for what I could have done differently,
Right.
or how maybe I was careless in terms of,
In
you
a
know,
way that your guard's down enough where you can actually examine those things
Right.
without be worried
yeah,
about
I
fighting
feel
the world.
safe. I feel safe to be vulnerable back with you, because you were just vulnerable in sharing what you're feeling and the thoughts that you're having.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm able to look at those things, and you're creating the best possible, how should I say it? The most expansive space for the greatest possible outcome.
Absolutely.
And so that's really, I think, the essence, the major component of what I wanted to share in regards to turning our relationships, where I literally feel like we're just shitting all over each other
Right.
most of the time, or shoulding
Right.
all over each
Right,
other, like,
right.
you should have done this.
Right. All the expectation and.
Yeah, and instead, you know, creating elationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the metaphor there, because, you know, there's this idea, and this kind of lends to one of, I think, our later scheduled discussions on oneness, right? And that we're all like sailors on the seas of fate, and we experience our lives rising or falling on the tides of life. Like, you know, life is hard, or life is, you know, good, depending on what happens to us.
Right.
And then there's this notion that, you know, this old saying I think Kennedy used, which was, you know, a rising tide lifts all boats. You know, we perceive ourselves as those boats, right? But as we transform, you know, there's a whole other level of empowered realization that we're actually also the water.
Right.
And we can raise the tide for ourselves by raising it for others.
Right.
In fact, it's probably more profound and powerful of an impact to raise it for others, because we tend to believe things more when they're reflected back to us.
Right.
Right? Like, I can look in the mirror and say, oh, I love you, to myself, and I'm an amazing person and all of this stuff. But if I get around 10 other people who say I'm a worthless piece of shit, it's going to be really challenging to hold that. Right? When everything that's getting reflected back to me is not in alignment.
Right.
You know, so we actually have, I think one of the greatest gifts we have to give to others is to gift them space for how extraordinary they are, which actually creates a space for them to rise into, and it holds people to their best,
Right.
you know. And then even if their intentions were shitty,
Right.
they're very often like, if someone's throwing stones at you and you come and like with a heart full of love and integrity,
Right.
give them roses.
Right. It's the most powerful thing possible.
It is, and it's one of the greatest gifts that, you know, I've ever received, when I wasn't being gracious with somebody and they were gracious in return.
Right.
You know, it also had me getting to own my own shit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and see that, oh wow, that's mine, rather than constantly displacing it.
Right.
It's like, if you're shitty to me and then I'm shitty back to you, you're able to use my shitty behavior to justify your shitty behavior, and then it just self-perpetuates.
Never-ending cycle, yeah.
Right? As where, you know, if I try to give you shit and you give something beautiful back to me, I'm humbled, right? And then often grateful.
Right.
And, you know, and
Changes the whole dynamic of the interaction.
And it creates whole, like, amazing, deeper levels of friendships,
Right.
and relationships, or elationships.
Right.
You know, there's also this fundamental thing. I think, I don't know if I touched upon this last time, but it's also an empowering context around. I realized in relationship years ago that I was always looking to find somebody that I could trust to never let me down,
Mm-hmm.
to always have my back,
Right.
never, you know, betray me,
Right.
right? And then after like the umpteenth failed
Right.
relationship, you know, and I'm like asking myself, like, why am I not finding a good person
Mhm.
anywhere? Like, I
Mhm.
keep looking for a good person
Mhm.
that's not, you know, that's gonna live up to those standards. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, am I that person for
Right.
myself?
Right.
Have I ever done something I said I would never do? Or stopped doing something I said I would always do? Have I ever gone against my word or made a mistake? Well, yeah, tons of times.
Right.
So
You're
I'm
like,
searching I'm searching for somebody that I can't even be myself.
Right.
How is that empowering?
Right.
And then, you know, and then it dawned on me, I was like, wow, you know what? This whole concept of trust is so disempowering for all of us, because we keep looking for greener pastures and then pissing and shitting all over those pastures until they look like crap, and then like saying, God, you know, I don't know why I can't find, you know, the grass looked green
Right.
and now it's all yellow.
Right. Right.
You know, without realizing that it's our own piss and shit
Right.
that's doing that. And I don't know why I'm using that, but, it's kind of funny. You know, so instead it's like we create the greener pastures in being the space for them to grow.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that space is acceptance, it's gratitude, it's appreciation. And this I know we did touch on, you know, last time, but it's like when you appreciate something, it grows.
Yeah.
You know, when you depreciate something, or you give it your
Atrophies.
right, and then in some cases it actually becomes worse.
Yeah.
You know, so it's
For
like
sure.
we can use our, how should I say it? If we center ourselves always on the greatest possible outcome
Mm-hmm.
in a situation and holding people to their greatest, we're always creating the space for the greatest possible outcome.
Right.
And that's where, yeah, those relationships become elationships, and we all rise together.
Would you?
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
It brought back to me what I was meaning before when I said, shoot, I just lost my train of thought. Okay, go.
Yeah. So, would you say the biggest takeaway for people who are hearing this and resonating with this are, you know, going into their relationships, and many of them having pre-existing relationships with spouses and boyfriends
Right.
and girlfriends and parents and children and siblings, is approaching those relationships and saying, okay, my next interaction, how can I be as transparent as possible, as vulnerable? Because what you see so often with interactions, it's always like this surface level gameplay, and people are sort of doing these things because of this underlying, they sort of have this, I don't know if you've ever seen it, I played the video not too long ago, Kyle Cease, I don't know if you know Kyle Cease. He's a comedian and, like a spiritual teacher / comedian and really sharp guy. And he has all this family sitting around the dinner table and what a spiritually evolved family talks like. And it's and he goes into great detail. Well, when you did this to me, it made me feel like it's getting just to the root of really all of the interactions.
I think I have seen that.
Yeah,
video.
and it's really clever and really true. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really great. So to me, as someone who always loves to go to like the base level of things, like how do I get to the root?
The root.
The more you get to the root, the more powerful it becomes. And so when I hear this conversation and talk about this and hearing your own unique way of kind of talking about it, it's like, how do we get in any interaction, if you find yourself interacting with anyone in a relationship or there's any kind of conflict, instead of sort of that posturing and I'm trying to get something out of it and I'm saying this, but really it's because of this underlying thing, just going straight to that underlying thing, especially if it makes you feel vulnerable. Because once you do that, you're going to realize that vulnerability is like I always will say, the lump of coal is always a diamond in disguise. Same kind of thing. It's like It appears vulnerable until you go there, and then you realize, wow, this is actually a power.
Yeah. And it brings up something. You just used the word transparent, and I'm glad you brought that up because it plays perfectly to this. Really, if you think of our vessels or our physical bodies literally as vessels, right? When we have something that we don't communicate or express, it's an energy that we keep inside.
Right.
Right. And that energy is actually in between you and I having connection, right? And if I'm withholding it, I'm not being communication with you. I'm not being oneness. I'm not being, I'm not being oneness with you.
Right.
So transparency is the key, like being clear.
Right.
And I know somebody said that's a Scientology term, and I'm like, well, I think they got it from these principles that actually being a clearing is essentially not only are you a clearing for yourself, but it magically creates a space of clearing for everybody else also.
Right.
Because if I start sharing this way, you tend to feel inspired to share the same way.
You set the tone.
Right? And then it's like, wow, all of that shit that was in the way of us actually having oneness and connection is gone.
Yeah.
And it happens in the opposite way of what, how we think it's going to happen.
Right.
It's kind of a more profound take on, like, I hear that the origin of the handshake was literally to show that I'm unarmed. Right?
Huh. Interesting. I've never heard that.
Yeah. And that's really what it is we want to disarm people because we're constantly ready to do battle in the way that we express.
For sure.
It's, again, defending or attacking or not being wrong, looking good. And in fact, like, looking bad, actually being able to admit, our flaws or our mistakes or the nasty thoughts that we're having actually does this thing of expressing them, gets them out of us.
Right.
So they're not us anymore.
It's like purging.
Yeah, it really is. It's purging and then staying clear, like you're much less affected by it.
Right.
So it's like even in my, if I'm sharing with you, like, the feeling that I'm having, one of the magical things that you begin to notice when you start using these tools is how when you, just in my sharing that with you, often that feeling will go away.
Yeah.
Especially when it's received, meaning like, you hear me and rather than like deflect it, or try to put it back on me. Well, you did this to me, or, well, you're one to talk, which is typically the way most, historically, I had always had communications going.
Right.
Was, I say like, you disrespected me, and you're like, well, you know what? You disrespected me, or you did it to me, months ago, or whatever. And it doesn't get us anywhere. It's like people constantly trying to one up each other when really all we want is connection, and all the way that we're being is ensuring that we have everything but connection.
Right.
Because superiority is not oneness either.
Right. If you went, how often have you had those sorts of victories in an argument, and then you feel like you fought so hard, and then you get there and you're like, okay, I won that battle. Man, I feel like shit. I feel so disconnected and so empty.
Yeah, in some cases you may feel good about making another person feel like shit because you feel like you've gotten something back. But then what, and this is maybe, again, this goes to the next topic, which is oneness. But, when we create an impact like that on somebody else, that impacts the world that we live in.
Yeah.
And then it comes around, just in the fact that, like, if I treat you in a way that has you feeling disempowered, and now you go out as a disempowered individual and make disempowered choices in the world, like, that's going to have ripple effects, that somehow come back around and affect my reality because we live on the same planet.
Right.
So, this is like, really, it's not just an empowering context for us as individuals and for our relationships, but it's really for the world.
Yeah.
And it's a way of, practicing being oneness, and really how the magical empowering effects of it, and once you start getting it, it's like, it's addictive. It almost like, I started, after having some of my transformational stuff, I was sharing stuff with people, like intimate things, from my past that I'd carried shame around, sexual stuff, or, stuff that happened when I was a child.
Super personal.
And, I think you never want to tell anybody this stuff because you don't want them to see your deep, dark secrets.
Right.
When in fact, sharing them with people, would often have the impact of them then sharing stuff with me that in many cases they told me they'd never shared with anybody.
That would then promote healing in them.
Yeah, and then they'd have healing, and then they would feel lighter in their bodies, because there's this thing when we don't express things or we hold things inside, it literally has like the effect of heaviness on our being.
Well, it actually gets the emotions become lodged in the body, they say, right? It's like...
Yeah, there's all sorts of, God, what do we call it? Eastern medicine, or, energetic stuff that talks about mind-body connection. And there's also the things, that I've heard of, we studied in school as well, called body syndromes, where it's like certain types of ailments tend to relate to certain types of emotional, issues or trauma, which again, for the most part, comes down to being clear.
Yeah.
Like, if you can be clear, and then ultimately it comes down to shedding shame.
Yeah.
Right? Because the only reason we wouldn't share something with someone else is because we think that there's something shameful about it that they could use against us, or that they would judge us, or see that we're less valuable.
Yeah.
When in fact, the sharing of it tends to have the opposite impact.
Yeah.
People tend to... The experience I've had is being valued more,
right,
and then being appreciated very often because I was the cause or the clearing for their shit to come out.
Yep.
It's been profound, and then the ripples that happen there is then they feel safe to go and share with others, and then it's like, if we just get everybody to purge all of the shit that they're holding on to, which is really like toxic, to us. I think we begin to see a world that has a lot more healing, a lot more wellness, a lot more joy,
right?
And real connection, which seems to be the one thing that we're always wanting and never finding, enough of.
Right. Well, that's fascinating insights, Chris. I really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to share. We're going to do a few more of these over the next coming weeks. So you have so much wisdom to share, and I look forward to picking your brain. Shame being one of them. Hearing you talk more about that very pertinent topic and sort of the root of shame and things like that. I'd like to get into that sometime in one of these forthcoming episodes. But, we're out of imaginary time for now. Luckily, there's plenty more where that came from. So we'll be back. We have, why don't we share some music? You have some music queued up. There's so much great music, guys, at One Love that this guy's helped to coordinate, from, Moby to Curly to Closey, one of my favorites, Mark Farina, Mushroom Jazz, like so much good stuff. So what do you have? I always like to let co-host be DJ extraordinaire.
Yeah, well, Curly is kind of a unique selection for us, and I don't think we've ever had anything like it at one of our shows, and she's like this amazing star from Estonia.
She's almost Bjork-esque, like, I feel like, and sort of her video productions are very elaborate.
And unique to her in her own right. Also, it's just like there's one song I think I'd love to share, which is called Blossom.
All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoy. Until next time, journey well.
frozen heartbeat under the snow. I've been waiting, ready to grow, shivering and weathering storms, dreaming of some other place warm. While my roots hit deeper inside, and my leaves they bundled up tight, I felt my faith get bigger than life. Not only did I survive, I learned to blossom. I learned to blossom, finding sunlight in the gray, knowing I will be okay. I learned to blossom, finding sunlight in the gray, through a lifetime with no rain. I'll blossom. Muted voices ghostly in wind, whispering this could be the end. Why are they forgetting me not? Can't they see I'm hurting enough? While my roots hit deeper inside, and my leaves they bundled up tight, I felt my faith get bigger than life. Not only did I survive, I learned to